The silence at a graveside is never truly silent. There is always something. Wind crossing dead grass, the distant groan of iron on iron, the sound of a city that does not know it should stop. Cressida Vane had stood at the edge of this particular silence for 3 years now, every November, every dawn, in the cold northern rail yard where her brother had drawn his last breath between 2 carriages that should never have moved. She came alone. She always came alone. Not because she was without allies. Cressida Vane controlled the largest private railway empire in England. Her signature moved capital across 3 counties. Her name alone could silence a boardroom or collapse a share price before noon. She had more power than most men in London would ever hold, and she held it in white-gloved hands that had not stopped trembling since the night they told her Aldous was gone. She came alone because grief, she had learned, was the one thing powerful men could not resist turning into a weapon. She is overwhelmed, they said in the first year. She is unstable, they said in the second. And in the third, the cruelest year, the year of slow erasure, they simply stopped saying anything at all, because silence is more efficient than cruelty when you are trying to make a woman disappear. Oswin Grail had taught her that. He sat on her board. He attended her dinners. He offered her condolences at every public occasion with the practiced warmth of a man who has rehearsed sympathy so many times it no longer resembles the original. He was the most respected railway magnate in England. He had been her father's oldest ally. He had wept at Aldous' funeral, a single tear, perfectly placed. And then, within 6 months, begun the quiet, methodical work of dismantling everything her brother had ever built. Cressida had watched it happen the way you watch a fire from too great a distance, certain of the danger, unable to close the gap in time. 3 investigators, 3 men she had paid to find the truth about Aldous' death. The first had his license revoked within a fortnight. The second received a visit she was never told the full details of, only that afterward he returned every coin she had given him and refused to meet her eyes. The third had sent her a single message before vanishing entirely from London. "They already know you're looking. Stop looking." She had not stopped. She had simply learned to look differently. Because Aldous had not died in an accident? The inquest said so. The reports said so. The official documents, signed and sealed and filed in the offices of 3 separate government bodies, said so. But Aldous had written to her 4 days before he died, a letter she had read so many times the paper had softened at the folds. And in that letter, he had said something that no man who intended to die accidentally ever said. "I think I have made someone very afraid, Cressida. I think my invention is going to cost certain people more than they are willing to pay. If anything happens before I can reach you, look at the Northern Yard. Look at who was there that night." She had looked. For 3 years she had looked. And she had found nothing. Until this morning. Until the man in the dark crimson coat. He was standing at the far end of the yard when she arrived, completely still, his back to her, staring at the exact stretch of track where Aldous had fallen. Not the entrance, not the general yard, the exact place. The kind of specific that cannot be guessed. The kind of specific that only comes from having been there. Cressida did not call out. She had not survived 3 years of Oswin Grail's quiet war by announcing herself before she understood what she was facing. She studied him instead. His coat was well cut, but old. The coat of a man who had once commanded rooms and had since learned to move through them differently. His posture carried something she recognized immediately, not from society, not from ballrooms, but from her own mirror, the specific stillness of a person carrying something too heavy to put down and too dangerous to show. He had not heard her arrive. Or he had, and he was doing precisely what she was doing, waiting to understand what he was facing. The wind shifted. A locomotive groaned somewhere beyond the yard walls, and then, as though the sound had decided something for him, the man in the crimson coat turned. His eyes found hers across the November gray. Cressida Vane had faced down boards of directors, furious shareholders, a grief that had tried to hollow her out from the inside, and the slow, controlled malice of the most dangerous man in English railways. She was not easily unsettled, but the expression on this man's face unsettled her completely. Because it was not a pity. London had been giving her pity for 3 years, and she knew every variation of it. The soft kind, the condescending kind, the kind that was really just relief that the tragedy had happened to her and not to them. This was not a pity. This was guilt. The deep, corroded, 3-year-old guilt of a man who knows exactly what happened in this yard, and has spent every day since trying to decide whether the truth is worth what it will cost him. His name, she would discover within the hour, was Emmerich Coldwell. He was the disgraced Duke of Hartmore. His title was nearly worthless. His estates were ruined. His reputation in London was the kind that made invitations stop arriving, and old friends develop convenient memory loss. He was also, yet according to the document Oswin Grail had produced at last month's shareholders' dinner, the document that had made 500 people turn to look at Cressida's face in the same moment, the third man to sign the declaration that her brother's death was an accident. She should have turned around. Every rational thought she possessed told her to turn around. Instead, Cressida Vane lifted her chin, crossed the cold gravel of the rail yard, and walked directly toward the man who had signed away her brother's life. Because she had not survived 3 years of silence to walk away from the only person who had ever come back to the scene of the crime, and because Aldous had told her to look at who was there that night. She was finally looking. He did not send a card. He did not request an appointment through her butler or arrive at a socially acceptable hour with flowers and rehearsed condolences. Emmerich Coldwell knocked on the door of Vane House at 7 in the morning, 3 days after the rail yard, in the same dark crimson coat, with the same expression she had not been able to stop thinking about. And when her butler informed her, Cressida did not hesitate. She said, "Send him in," and hated herself slightly for how quickly she said it. He entered her study the way men enter rooms they know may destroy them, directly, without looking for exits. He did not compliment the house. He did not offer pleasantries. He stood on the opposite side of her father's desk and said, without introduction, "Aldous wrote to me 11 times between January and October of the year he died." Cressida's pen stopped moving. "We corresponded about his signaling system," Emmerich continued. "I had contacts in the German rail industry, engineers who had attempted something similar. He wanted their data. I provided it." His voice did not waver. "By September, He had built something that worked, something that would have made every existing signaling system in England obsolete overnight. "I know what he built," Cressida said quietly. "Then you know what it would have cost to replace those systems." Emmerich placed a folded document on the desk. Harwick Rail, Northern Crown Freight, and Grail and Associates. He let the last name land. 3 companies. Combined losses upon mandatory upgrade. Conservatively, £4 million. The study was very still. Cressida looked at the document. She did not touch it yet. "If you knew all of this," she said, and her voice was the voice she used in boardrooms when she already knew the answer and needed the other person to understand that she knew. "Where were you the night he died?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. She counted them. Emmerich did not look away from her, which she noted, because guilty men almost always looked away. He held her gaze with the expression of someone absorbing a blow they decided long ago they deserved. "That," he said quietly, "is the question I will answer. But not yet." Cressida's eyes sharpened. "That is not acceptable." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He nodded toward the document. "But those names are. And you cannot get close to those men alone, not without them seeing you coming. Your name, your face, your connection to Aldous, it makes every door close before you reach it. And your name opens them. What remains of it?" The faintest shadow crossed his face. "I have information you cannot access. You have resources I no longer possess." He held her gaze steadily. "We both want the same thing." Cressida was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the document. She did not offer her hand when she finally agreed. Neither did he. But, as Emmerich turned toward the door, she noticed what she had been too guarded to notice before. His jaw was set too carefully, his shoulders held too precisely, the specific, controlled posture of a man keeping himself together through sheer will. She recognized it intimately, and it was exactly how she had looked every day for 3 years. She said nothing, but the thought lodged somewhere beneath her composure and refused to leave. He is not here because of the alliance. He is here because he cannot live with himself anymore. And somehow, that terrified her far more than his silence did. Emmerich attended Oswin Grail's first dinner on a Thursday. He returned to Vane House at 10:30 that same night, let himself through the side entrance Cressida had quietly arranged, and sat down across from her with the look of a man who had spent 3 hours smiling at someone he wanted to destroy. Harwick's representative was there, he said, before she could ask. A man named Tollert. He and Grail spoke privately before the meal. Twice. He placed a folded note on the desk. "I could not hear the full exchange, but I heard one word clearly." Cressida looked at the note. Written in Emmerich's controlled hand was a single word. Vane. The room was very quiet. "They are watching you," Emmerich said. "Not the company. You, specifically." Cressida did not react. She had learned long ago that reacting was something enemies collected and used later. She simply filed the information in the place behind her eyes where she kept everything that frightened her, and nodded once. This became their rhythm. Every night for 3 weeks, Emmerich moved through Oswin's world in his worn crimson coat. Dinners, club rooms, investment meetings where men spoke freely because the only other person present was a disgraced duke with nothing left to protect. He laughed at the right moments, He deflected the wrong questions. He made himself useful enough to be included and forgettable enough to be ignored. And every night he came back to Cressida. She began to recognize the specific way he knocked, 3 times, unhurried. And she hated that she recognized it. She hated it more that by the second week she had told her butler not to bother announcing him. Piece by piece, they rebuilt the night Aldous died. The pieces were not dramatic. They were worse than dramatic. They were bureaucratic. A rescheduled inspection. A gate left unlocked. A foreman transferred to a southern yard 2 days before and was replaced by a man whose hiring Cressida could not trace to anyone inside the company. Someone had arranged every detail with the patience of a person who had done this before. On the 19th night, Emmerich arrived later than usual. Cressida was still at her desk. Aldous's original engineering notes spread across the surface, her finger tracing calculations her brother had written in his cramped, urgent hand. Emmerich sat down and watched her work in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "He spoke about you constantly, you know." Cressida's hand stilled on the page. In his letters. Emmerich's voice was careful, the way voices become careful around things that are still breakable. "He said you were the only person who never made him feel small." Cressida turned to the window. The city outside was dark and indifferent, and she was grateful for it because she needed 3 full seconds before she could trust her own face again. When she turned back, she did not disguise what was in her eyes. She was too tired tonight for that particular performance, and the grief was there, raw, unpolished, 3 years old and still bleeding at the edges, and she let it be seen. Emmerich looked at her, not with pity, not with discomfort, with the focused, steady attention of a man to whom she had just become, without ceremony or permission, the most important thing in the room. Cressida told herself it meant nothing. She told herself that twice. It did not help either time. She had attended worse dinners than this one. That was what Cressida told herself as she took her seat at the long table of the English Railway Shareholders' Assembly, the most powerful gathering in the industry, held every quarter in a room that smelled of old money and older ambition. She had sat at this table for 3 years, the only woman among 40 men, and she had learned to read the room the way engineers read pressure gauges. Small signs, early warnings. The specific quality of silence that meant something was already in motion. Tonight, the silence had that quality before the first course arrived. Oswin Grail was seated 4 places to her left. He had greeted her at the door with his customary warmth. Both hands, the slight bow, the expression of a man who had perfected the art of looking trustworthy. And she had smiled back with the smile she kept specifically for him, the one that reached her eyes just far enough. She had not looked at Emmerich since they arrived. That was deliberate. The meal progressed. The conversation moved through freight tariffs and northern expansion, and the usual theater of powerful men performing certainty at each other. Cressida contributed precisely where required and volunteered nothing. Then Oswin set down his wineglass. The movement was quiet, almost gentle. But 3 men at the table straightened almost imperceptibly, and Cressida's internal pressure gauge swung hard. "Gentlemen," Oswin said, rising slowly, "I hope you will forgive a brief interruption. There is a matter I feel the Assembly deserves to address directly." He reached into his coat and produced a document. Single page. aged at the edges. It has recently come to my attention that certain questions have been circulating regarding the death of Aldous Vane 3 years ago. The room went very still. Cressida did not move. "I produced this document," Oswin continued, his voice carrying the measured gravity of a man performing public service, "in the interest of clarity. It is the official declaration filed the night of the incident, signed by the attending inspector, the yard foreman," he paused, "and the Duke of Hartmore, who was present at the yard as a private witness. 40 pairs of eyes found Emmerich. Then, one by one, they found Cressida. She felt every single glance like a separate small wound. But her face did not change. She had built that face over 3 years of boardrooms, and she held it now with everything she had, because the alternative was letting this room, letting Oswin see the exact shape of what had just broken inside her. Her hand, resting on the white tablecloth, closed slowly into a fist. She did not look at Emmerich. She could not, because if she looked at him, London would see exactly how deep the blade had gone. And she refused. She absolutely refused to give Oswin Grail that satisfaction on top of everything else he had already taken. She waited until the attention shifted, until Oswin sat down with the quiet triumph of a man who had just detonated something and wanted to watch the fire. Then she folded her napkin, pushed back her chair with the unhurried composure of a woman leaving by choice, and walked out of the room without a word to anyone. The corridor was cold. Her heels were very loud on the marble. She heard him behind her almost immediately. She did not stop walking. Cressida. One word, her name in his voice, and something about the way he said it. Not a defense, not an explanation, just her name, raw and without armor, made her stop. She did not turn. The corridor was empty, and the sounds of the dinner floated distantly behind them, silver and glass and the performance of normalcy. "How much?" she said quietly. "Did he pay you?" The question was barely above a whisper. It landed like a verdict, and the silence that followed was the worst sound she had ever heard from him, because it was not the silence of innocence. It was the silence of a man who knows that the truth, finally arriving, is going to cost him the one thing he cannot afford to lose. He knocked at midnight, 3 times, unhurried. Cressida was already awake. She had not attempted sleep. She stood at her study window in the dark with a cold cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, watching the street below with the specific stillness of a woman who is not waiting, who refuses to be waiting, and yet has not moved from the window in 2 hours. She told her butler to send him in, not because she had forgiven him. She wanted that absolutely clear, if only to herself. She had not forgiven him. She did not know yet if forgiveness was something she was capable of in this particular direction. But she needed to hear it, all of it, every word, directly from his mouth, before she could decide what came next. She needed to watch him dismantle himself with the truth before she could determine whether anything salvageable remained underneath. Emmerich entered without his coat. She noticed that immediately. He had come without the crimson coat, in just his shirt and waistcoat. And somehow, that undid something in the room's atmosphere before he even spoke. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had run out of things to hide behind. He did not sit. He stood in the center of the study and began. Aldous had written to him in October. Not about the invention this time, about the test. The first successful live test of the completed signaling system conducted in secret at the Northern Yard. Aldous had wanted a witness he trusted. Someone outside the company. Someone whose presence could not be controlled or erased by the men who had already begun circling. He had trusted Emmerich. Emmerich's voice did not break when he said that. But something behind his eyes did, visibly, and he pressed forward before either of them could acknowledge it. He was there that night. He watched the test succeed. He watched Aldous' face when it worked. The expression of a man who has just proven that everything he believed was true. And then the carriages moved, and the world ended in approximately 4 seconds. And before Emmerich had fully understood what had happened, Oswin Grail's men were already in the yard. They were very calm, very organized. The kind of calm that meant they had been waiting nearby. They explained the situation with remarkable efficiency. Signed the declaration, accidental death, no foul play, no witnesses of consequence. And he would leave the yard alive and untouched. Decline, and the report would name him. A disgraced duke, present at the scene, with documented financial grievances against the Vane family. The story would write itself. He was 26 years old, already ruined, already alone. He signed. The study was completely silent. "I have spent 3 years trying to find a way to undo it," Emmerich said. His voice was very quiet now, stripped of everything except the truth underneath. "Every path I found, every contact, every document, every single road led back to you." He looked at her steadily. "I came to the yard on the anniversary because I needed to see if I could still face it. And you were already there." Cressida stood at her window for a long time. She did not speak. She did not move. Outside, London continued its indifferent dark. Carriages on wet stone, a distant locomotive, the city that had watched her grieve for 3 years and called it instability. When she finally turned, her eyes were not soft, but they were not closed. "Then you will finish what you started," she said quietly. "For him." The words fell between them like a stone into still water. "And if you fail," her voice did not waver, "I will bury you myself." Emmerich nodded once. I know." And something settled between them in that moment. Not forgiveness, not absolution, nothing that clean or that easy. But a decision. A shared and irreversible decision, made by 2 people who understood exactly what it would cost. Sometimes that is the bravest thing. Sometimes that is everything. The annual meeting of the English Railway Commission was held in the Great Hall of Meridian House, a building designed specifically to make individuals feel small against the weight of institutional power. 500 seats, every one of them filled. Lords, investors, members of Parliament, 3 separate press correspondents with their notebooks already open. The kind of room where reputations were made permanent in either direction. Emmerich had arrived before the doors opened. Cressida had told him she would be there. He had told her not to sit at the front. She had looked at him with the expression she reserved for suggestions she found professionally insulting, and said nothing, which he had learned by now meant she would do exactly as she chose. He found her near the back as he entered, standing, not seated, her white-gloved hands folded in front of her, her face composed into the particular stillness that had taken him weeks to understand was not coldness. It was the expression of a woman who has survived long enough to know that hope is a thing you protect carefully, because you cannot afford to lose it twice. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away first. He needed to be able to think clearly for the next hour. The commission chairman opened the proceedings with the usual formalities, agenda items, procedural announcements, to the administrative machinery of institutional England grinding through its expected motions. Emmerich sat through all of it without moving. The documents were in his left coat pocket. Aldous' engineering notes, annotated in that cramped, urgent hand he had come to know as well as his own, were in his right. The sworn testimonies from 2 yard workers, men Cressida had spent 3 years quietly, patiently locating, men who had been present that night and transferred away before morning, were folded beneath both. When the chairman invited floor contributions, Emmerich stood. The room noticed immediately. A disgraced duke at a railway commission meeting was already unusual. A disgraced duke rising to speak with that particular quality of stillness. The stillness of a man who has decided, completely and irrevocably, that he has nothing left to protect, was something different entirely. He began with himself. That was the only way. He had understood that from the moment he and Cressida had made their decision in her lamplit study. The only way to expose Oswin was to remove every weapon Oswin held. And every weapon Oswin held was built from Emmerich's silence. So he dismantled the silence first, piece by piece, in front of 500 people and 3 press correspondents. He described the night, the test, Aldous' face when the signaling system worked, the 4 seconds, Oswin's men, already waiting in the yard with their calm efficiency and their pre-prepared documents, his own signature, given at 26 years old, under a threat he had believed completely and regretted every day since. He placed the original forged accident report on the chairman's table. He placed Aldous' engineering notes beside it. He placed the 2 sworn testimonies on top of both. And then he turned and looked directly at Oswin Grail. Oswin's composure broke in stages. Emmerich watched it happen with the detached precision of a man who has rehearsed this moment so many times it has become almost architectural. First, the slight confusion of a predator who has encountered unexpected resistance, then the controlled fury beneath the surface as he calculated responses and found each one already blocked. And finally, the thing that replaced both, a cold, pale, hollowed expression that Emmerich recognized as the specific look of a man watching everything he has built begin to crack at the foundation. It was, he thought, the same expression he had seen in his own mirror 3 years ago. He did not enjoy it. He simply noted it and continued. When he finished, the room was completely silent for 4 full seconds. Then it erupted. Not into chaos, but into the urgent overlapping noise of 500 powerful people simultaneously recalibrating. The chairman called for order. 2 commissioners were already conferring in low, rapid voices. A press correspondent was writing so quickly, his pen was audible from 3 rows away. The formal motion for a full reinvestigation of Aldous Vane's death was called, seconded, and passed within 20 minutes. Oswin Grail was escorted from the room by 2 commission officers at 23 minutes. He did not look at Cressida as he passed. Cressida watched him go with an expression that contained no triumph whatsoever, only the steady, clear-eyed recognition of a woman filing away the closing of a very long account. Emmerich found her near the back when the room began to empty. She was very still. The composed face was still in place, but something beneath it had shifted. The specific exhausted quality of a person who has been holding enormous weight for so long that the moment it lifts, they do not feel light. They feel the full accumulated cost of every day they carried it. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then she said quietly, "He would have liked you." Emmerich closed his eyes. 6 words, delivered without decoration or sentiment, in the same precise voice she used for railway calculations and boardroom decisions and every truth she had ever chosen to say aloud instead of protecting herself by keeping silent. 6 words that undid him more completely than anything else in that room had managed. When he opened his eyes, Cressida was still there. She had not moved. She was not moving. And the expression on her face, unguarded now, grief and exhaustion and something warmer underneath both, was the expression he understood he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of. Outside, across the fog-covered rooftops of London, the distant sound of a locomotive moved through the cold afternoon air. Aldous' railways, still running, still carrying the world forward, exactly as he had always believed they would. Inside the emptying hall, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Cressida exhaled, slowly, completely, the breath of 3 years finally released, and took one step toward him. Just one. It was enough. If this story moved you, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Aldous deserved to be remembered. So does every brilliant person this world tries to erase. Don't let this be the last story we tell together.